The small harbor waves lapped at the rocks and left little pools of green water here and there. Some of the rocks were draped in moss, and others had pretty spots of bird dung. The ponderous odor of the sea came up. Under the girders it was so cold and so dark I couldn't see much. From above I heard the traffic pounding, horns honking, men yelling, and big trucks battering the timber cross pieces. It was such a terrible din that it hammered my ears, and when I yelled, my voice went out a few feet and rushed back as if fastened to a rubber band. I crawled along the stones until I got out of the range of the sunlight. It was a strange place. For a while I was scared. Farther on there was a great stone, bigger than the rest, its crest ringed with the white dung of gulls. It was the king of all those stones with a crown of white. I started for it. All of a sudden everything at my feet began to move. It was a quick, slimy moving of things that crawled. I caught my breath, hung on, and tried to fix my gaze. They were crabs! The stones were alive and swarming with them. I was so scared I couldn't move, and the noise from above was nothing compared to the thunder of my heart. I leaned against a stone and put my face in my hands until I wasn't afraid. When I took my hands away, I could see through the blackness, and it was gray and cold, like a world under the earth, a gray, solitary place. For the first time, I got a good look at the things living down there. The big crabs were the size of house bricks, silent and cruel as they held forth on top their large stones, their menacing antennae moving sensuously like the arms of a hula dancer, their little eyes mean and ugly. There were a lot more of the smaller crabs, about the size of my hand, and they swarm around in the little black pools at the base of the rocks, crawling over one another, pulling one another in the lapping blackness as they fought for positions on the stones. They were having a good time. There was a nest of even smaller crabs at my feet, each the size of a dollar, a big chunk of squirming legs jumbled together. One of them grabbed my pants cuff. I pulled him off and held him while he clawed helplessly and tried to bite me. I had him throw, and he was helpless. I pulled back my arm and threw him against a stone. He crackled, smashed to death, stuck for a moment upon the stone, then falling with blood and water exuding. I picked up the smashed shell and tasted the yellow fluid coming from it, which was salty as seawater, and I didn't like it. I threw him out to deep water. He floated until a jack smelt swam around him and examined him, and then began to bite him viciously and finally dragged him out of sight, the smelt slithering away. My hands were bloody and sticky, and the smell of the sea was on them. All about once I felt a swelling in me to kill the crabs, every one of them. The small ones didn't interest me. It was the big ones I wanted to kill and kill. The big fellows were strong and ferocious, with powerful incisors. They were worthy adversaries for the great Bandini, the conquering Arturo. I looked around but couldn't find a switch or a stick. On the bank against the concrete there were a pile of stones. I rolled up my sleeves and started throwing them at the largest crab I could see, one asleep on a stone 20 feet away. The stones landed all around him, within an inch of him, sparks and chips flying, but he didn't even open his eyes to find out what was going on. I threw about 10 times before I got him. It was a triumph. The stone crushed his back with the sound of a breaking soda cracker. It went clear through him, hitting him to the stone. Then he went into the water, the foamy green bubbles at the edge swallowing him. I watched him disappear and shook my fist at him, waving angry farewells as he floated to the bottom. Goodbye, goodbye. We will doubtless meet again in another world. You will not forget me, crab. You will remember me forever and ever as your conqueror. Killing them with stones was too tough. The stones were so sharp they cut my fingers when I heaved them. I washed the blood and slime off my hands and made my way to the edge again. Then I climbed onto the bridge and walked down the street to a ship chandler's shop 3 blocks away, where they sold guns and ammunition. I told the white-faced clerk I wanted to buy an air gun. He showed me the high-powered one, and I laid the money down and bought it without questions. I spent the rest of the 10 on ammunition, BB shot. I was anxious to get back to the battlefield, so I told Whiteface not to wrap the ammunition, but give it to me like that. He thought this was strange, and he looked over to me while I scooped the cylinders off the counter and left the shop as fast as I could, but not running. When I got outside, I started to run, and then I sensed somebody was watching me, and I looked around, and sure enough, Whiteface was standing in the door and peering after me through the hot afternoon air. I slowed down to a fast walk until I got to the corner, and then I started to run again. I shot crabs all that afternoon until my shoulder hurt behind the gun and my eyes ached behind the gun sight. I was Dictator Bandini, Iron Man of Crabland. There was another blood purge for the good of the fatherland. They had tried to unseat me, those damn crabs. They had the guts to try to torment a revolution, and I was getting revenge. To think of it, it infuriated me. Those goddamn crabs had actually questioned the might of Superman Bandini. What had gone into them to be so stupidly presumptuous? Well, they were going to get a lesson they would never forget. This was going to be the last revolution they'd ever attempt, by Christ. I gnashed my teeth when I thought of it. A nation of revolting crabs. What guts. God, I was mad. I pumped shot until my shoulder ached and a blister rose on my trigger finger. I killed over 500 and wounded twice as many. They were alive to the attack, insanely angry and frightened as the dead and wounded dropped from the ranks. The siege was on. They swarmed towards me. Others came out of the sea, still others from behind rocks, moving in vast numbers across the plain of stones toward death, who sat on a high rock out of their reach. I gathered some of the wounded into a pool and had a military conference and decided to counter martial them. I drew them out of the pool one at a time, sitting each over the mouth of the rifle and pulling the trigger. There was one crab, brightly colored and full of life, who reminded me of a woman, doubtless a princess among the renegades, a brave crabbess seriously injured. One of her legs shot away, an arm dangling pitifully. It broke my heart. I had another conference and decided that, due to the extreme urgency of the situation, there must not be any sexual discrimination. Even the princess had to die. It was an unpleasant thought, but it had to be done. With a sad heart, I knelt among the dead and dying and invoked God in a prayer, asking that He forgive me to this most beastly of the crimes of Superman, the execution of a woman. And yet, after all, duty was duty. The old order must be preserved. Revolution must be stamped out. The regime had to go on. The renegades must perish. For some time, I talked to the princess in private, formally extending to her the apologies of the Bandini government, and abiding by her last request, it was that I permit her to hear La Paloma. I whistled it to her with great feeling so that I was crying when finished. I raised my gun to her beautiful face and pulled the trigger. She died instantly, gloriously, a flaming mass of shell and yellowed blood. Out of sheer reverence and admiration, I ordered a stone place where she had fallen, this ravishing heroine of one of the world's unforgettable revolutions, who had perished during the bloody June days of the Bandini government. History was written that day. I made the sign of the cross over the stone, kissed it reverently, even with a touch of passion, and held my head low in momentary cessation of attack. It was an ironic moment, for in a flash I realized I loved that woman. But on, Bandini! The attack began again. Shortly after, I shot down another woman. She was not so seriously injured. She suffered from shock. Taken prisoner, she offered herself to me, body and soul. She begged herself to spare my life. She begged me to spare her life. I laughed fiendishly. She was an exquisite creature, reddish and pink, and only a foregone conclusion as to my destiny made me accept her touching offer. There, beneath the bridge in the darkness, I ravaged her while she pleaded for mercy. Still laughing, I took her out and shot her to pieces, apologizing for my brutality. The slaughter finally stopped when my head ached from eye strain. Before leaving, I took another last look around. The miniature cliffs were smeared with blood. It was a triumph, a very great victory for me. I went among the dead and spoke to them consolingly. For even though they were my enemies, I was all that a man of nobility, and I had respected them and admired them for the valiant struggle they had offered my legions. Death had arrived for you, I said. Goodbye, dear enemies. You were brave in fighting and braver in death. and Fuhrer Bandini has not forgotten. He overtly praised even in death. To others I said, Goodbye, thou coward. I spit on thee in disgust. Thy cowardice is repugnant to the Fuhrer. He hateth cowardice as he hateth the plague. He will not be reconciled. May the tides of the sea wash thy cowardly crime from the earth, thou knave. I climbed back to the road just as the 6 o'clock whistles were blowing and started for home. There were some kids playing ball in an empty lot out in the street, and I gave them a gun and ammunition in exchange for a pocket knife, which one kid claimed was worth $3. But he didn't fool me because I knew the knife wasn't worth more than 50 cents. I wanted to get rid of the gun, though, so I made the deal. The kids figured I was a sap, but I let them.